You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
I called you SpongeBob.
Yes, I heard you.
You didn't react.
Because I live in a pineapple under the sea.
You didn't react. All right. No, because you said I'm ready. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan. I'm here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
And you're damn glad I am, because I'm a special
SpongeBob.
person in your life.
You are a special person in my life. And I will tell you that there are 3 people in my life that I would actually pay attention to if they gave me advice and take it under advisement, and most of the time find that that advice was extremely helpful, and you are one of them.
But I so rarely do that.
Well,
because I believe you should swim in your own pool.
You do it for me more than maybe you know.
Well, there is that.
Because yeah. And I don't mean that to be facetious. You may say things that you aren't intending to be that I use in that way for myself. Yeah.
Okay. That's more acceptable to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, you had given me some advice today that I thought was very salient and sagely that I appreciate very much. So.
Well, hot damn.
Yeah.
So let's talk about self-esteem.
Yeah, I was going to say, and maybe even felt better about myself.
But it's such an uphill climb.
To feel better?
About yourself.
And, I think that for me and my conceptualization, and I think that people who listen to this podcast regularly, and you have said forever, that you and I almost always clinically get to the same place, but we get there on very divergent roads.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm all about biology.
Much
and
like
I
if
want
you
to
use
talk about
Google
things.
Maps to go somewhere and it says you one with toll roads and one without toll roads.
I'm always on the toll road.
Yeah.
And you're always on.
I'm free range.
Yeah. And so for me, self-esteem is such a concept that has been misunderstood and misrepresented, much like emotions in psychology. And I think that that's so unfortunate, because for me, I see self-esteem as immutable, as a thing that exists within the ego. So according to Freud, you have the id, the ego, the superego. So your self-esteem lives as a part of your identity constructs within the ego, and it's immutable. You can't do anything about it. But it's like a house that's built on a foundation, and the foundation is self-confidence. So self-esteem being the global definition of the self, self-confidence being domain-specific. So for example, you might think of yourself as a very, very good writer, but still have very low self-esteem. So domain-specific self-confidence, you have high confidence in your ability as a writer, even if your global perception of self is very low. And so if you can look at your domains that you operate in and work on the confidence that you have in those individual domains, your self-esteem will automatically improve.
I don't know. I listen to that and I get lost in all the definitions.
I know, and that's what I'm saying is that, so I have a need, and I don't know where that puts us on the Myers-Briggs, but I have a need to conceptualize things, to identify them, to explain them, and, it just occurred to me, this is a blazing side of insight, a blazing example of insight, but that comes from an insecure place. It makes me feel more secure and more in control if I can identify it, label it, and explain
Break it down. Yeah.
But I also think there's value in that. I think there's value in that for some people.
There's for you.
There is for me, and I think there are other people who are like me.
Yeah, I agree.
But you are much more intuitive. Like you just say, okay, I know this thing and I feel this thing, and I would argue I agree with you 100%, but you're not as worried about labeling it, identifying it, explaining it.
No.
Yeah.
No, that's not my thing. Not usually.
Yeah.
So when I think about self-esteem, I think that I don't know about all the innate stuff and the domain-specific stuff and all that that you were articulating, but I think self-esteem is something that you develop as a small child by interpreting and understanding the reactions that the adults in your world have to you. Mm-hmm. And so if they shine on you with warmth and affection, you have decent self-esteem. And then you receive that as a reflection of yourself in their eyes. Then life experience begins to flesh that out. And so if you have success with certain behaviors, then you build a base of validity for positive self-esteem. I'm good at this, and I'm good at that. I'm good at hitting a baseball. I'm good at tying my shoes. I'm good in school at getting grades, whatever the thing becomes. And then you develop an externalized, scripted self-esteem that you wear. But I think as an adult, as an old adult, I would say I have a critical self-esteem. And I talk to people about this sometimes. I have a very positive public persona. I have worked hard to develop it and present it to people, especially in a professional setting. If I'm giving a speech somewhere, if I'm on a committee for something, or if I'm at a conference and I represent a company or whoever, then I present myself with that public persona. But in my personal self-esteem map, I'm very self-critical. And I was raised as a child with an incredible mix of really positive strokes and really negative strokes. And so I have that.
That came from the same source or came from different sources?
Different sources.
Yeah, that's what I would assume. Yeah.
But
so you had some people in your life that were giving you those really positive strokes, and then you had other people that were giving you critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I developed that bifurcated sense of good self, bad self, which some psychologists will argue is the foundation of all kinds of personality disorders. So maybe I'm ripe with personality disorders. You have to ask others. I'm not aware. That's the narcissist.
Well, I'd ask your therapist.
Yeah, well,
she won't tell me.
She wouldn't know. I wouldn't show her. I wouldn't tell her. So I have a real sense of my own negatives that I try hard not to show to the world. And so when people talk to me about religion or about being a good person or about whatever, I know my own dark places. I've spent time there.
Right.
I judge myself because of those. I'm self-critical because of those.
And Jung would call that the shadow.
Yeah. I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
Yeah. Not the way he would.
Oh.
My point is, part of my self-awareness is hyper self-critical. But part of my self-awareness is putting on the Ritz, is putting on the show. And I can sell. I can go and sell smoke and mirrors. I'm a charmer. I can make you laugh. I can make you feel good. If I attend to you and do reflective listening, you think, oh, he's really smart. He heard me. He understood what I was saying. So which of those is me? How much of that is me? Which half? Are they halves? Are they 2/3, 1/3?
Why couldn't it all be?
Well, because it is. I mean, it absolutely is. But which is the better part? Which is the right part? Which is the good part?
I would say there's no. It's not a contest. There's no judgment that's required.
So how do I avoid hypocrisy?
Well, you do what Jung said, which is that you have to embrace the shadow to be able to be whole. Otherwise, you're living that bifurcated identification.
But don't we all do that?
To a certain extent.
Are any of us whole
Absolutely.
that way? In a Jungian sense?
I mean, I guess the Dalai Lama would be an example of the least bifurcated example of a person.
Well, but he was reincarnated at the age of 4.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that all the mysticism, but I'm just saying as a presentation, externally, he would seem to be one of the least bifurcated. So, when you were talking about that idea that when you were young, people give you those strokes, and that's where your self-esteem originates from. You turned me on to Heinz Kohut when I was in graduate school. That is now the beacon of, or the foundation for everything that I understand,
framing your understanding
about human psychology. And he called that mirroring, and that was required for the individual to even be able to live like that. That's how important that is. And you are going to be mirrored by others in your environment, whether they intend that or not. So you, as a parent or as a caregiver, or even just as a role model, as an uncle, aunt, or just somebody in a child's life, are mirroring that child, whether you know you are or not, right? So if the child drags himself up the leg...
Or the child is mirroring you.
Well, I call that social reciprocity, but because yes, the child is mirroring you, but that's not the same. The child doesn't have the ability to mirror the adult the way that as far as what Kohut was talking about, because the child doesn't have those structures yet, those internalized structures yet. But you are mirroring that child, so the child pulls himself up on the leg of a piece of furniture and takes a couple of stuttering steps and falls backwards, and the mom scoops the child up and says, "Oh, what a good baby, you're learning how to walk, you're such a great baby." That child feels great, feels secure, feels safe, can't wait to get down on the ground and do that again. But if the child pulls himself up on the leg of a piece of furniture, takes a couple of stuttering steps, falls backwards, and everybody starts laughing, silly baby, let's put that on the internet, the child feels inferior, feels scared, feels very, very insecure. And so we're mirroring those children. And you're right, that is the foundation of self-esteem. It's also the foundation of emotional regulation, which we've talked about in the past. And then there's a whole nother process that we won't go into about how that gets internalized. But I think you're right. I think that is the foundational seeds of self-esteem.
So how do you cut through all the BS of the disparate agendas of your observers? My school teacher looks at me and says, "You're a pain in the butt because you can't sit still in the classroom."
Mm-hmm.
My school bus driver says, "You can't ride on the bus anymore because you stir up trouble."
Mm-hmm.
My parents say, "You're going to get a beating because you didn't wash the dishes correctly." So I get all these negative messages that say you don't have worth, you don't have value, you are in the way, you are a problem, hide or hurt, or hide and hurt.
Right, because it's never one or the other.
So how do you grow up and become a person that walks out into the world or the daylight and says, "Hey, you know what? I like me. I'm happy. I'm a good person. I do good things for others, and I do good things for me, and I bet people like me." Like Stuart Smalley. By golly, people like me.
So that's a great place to break, and we will pick that up on the other side.
One of the reasons that I want to participate in this show is because it gives me an opportunity to clinically review my understanding of what therapy is and how it works, especially for the consumer. So my hope is that we will find conversations that broaden my understanding of that.
And my hope is that we do that in a way that is useful but also entertaining for people, so that they want to listen, not only because they're getting good psychology information, but because they just enjoy the show.
Easy listening with an informational twist. So
that's a new tagline.
They're not sitting there going, "Huh?"
Easy listening with an informational twist.
I'm really good at this. I'm a professional.
You're a professional. If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back. And so are you proposing that question philosophically, or are you actually looking for an answer?
Is there a difference?
I mean, you could say these are unknowable things, and so I'm just presenting these as questions for people to muse on, but I think there is an answer.
All right, what do you think the answer is?
I think the answer is, as we've talked about before, for me, it's age. It's wisdom. You have to have a context within which to put those things.
So I think you're on the right track.
Yeah.
But I think going back to the specifics, as I develop the ability to observe myself, and as I find direction from my successes to avoid my failures and to come into the sunlight, to find things that I discover that I do well, for which I get positive feedback, whatever those things are. Whatever the environment around me values enough to give me positive feedback. But if I am on the baseball team and I strike out every single time, I get negative feedback from the players and the coaches, and they don't want to put me in the game. And so I tell myself, well, I'm not an athlete. I don't want to play sports. I don't want to be on the team. If I manage to hit that ball regularly and far, and everybody cheers, then I say, well, hey, I'm a baseball player. Let me have the at bat. Let me step up, like Michael Jordan taking the last shot of the game. Because I can hit it often enough that I get positive reinforcement that says to me, I can do this. So then we come to the, if I develop my sense of accomplishment, my sense of self-esteem from operationalizing my success, wherever I find success, whatever area I find success in. I cook dinner and everybody raves. And I say, well, hey, I can cook. And then I say to myself, hey, I'm a cook. If I take that and put it to the test in the world, then the world gives me feedback about it. And I have positive self-esteem in those domains. And that all comes from self-observation and self-selection based on the strokes that I get.
And I would, so the only thing that I would add to that, for me, personally, in my theory of psychology, I would actually call that self-confidence. You would have confidence in those domains, and that would directly impact your self-esteem, but your self-esteem is just a thing that lives in the ego.
My wife is one of the most articulate women that you'll ever encounter. She's well-read, she's deeply thoughtful, and she can explain herself verbally very well. But she's terrified of standing up in front of an audience and talking. I seek out audiences.
You and I
I'll
could
talk
never
in front of
understand
an audience when I don't know anything. I've been accused of that many times. So I have that strength, even whether it does or doesn't have foundational support. But I'm glad to talk in front of an audience.
And so that may go back to, is that a self-esteem thing, or is that an extrovert-introvert thing? And is extroversion, introversion self-esteem? Because I would argue introversion, extroversion is not self-esteem, because an introvert can have self-esteem.
Well,
so you don't have to be an extrovert to have self-esteem.
I'm an ambivert. There are times when I like people, times when I don't. And then others say I'm a pervert.
You're a lexicographer, so I understand that you're going to always play with the language. But do you agree with that premise, though, that introversion, extroversion is not the same thing as self-esteem? So people who think, oh, you have to be extroverted to have self-esteem. But I would say the
same thing is true if I'm an introvert. I will find areas where I feel accomplished and competent.
Right.
And I'll invest my time in those areas.
Exactly.
Okay.
And get feedback probably from other people.
But that brings me to the societal question of what I call the false self-esteem movement that has been prevalent in American culture for the last 30 years, where it became a thing that we never disappoint a child and never allow a child to feel negative emotions about themselves, which they then have to learn to manage. So if we protect them from that, and if every kid gets a trophy, no matter what they do or how they perform, but they all get trophies, then the trophy loses its value or its merit. If I never have to win the race to win the reward, then the race has no merit and no value for me. And so you get all these kids that have gotten these empty awards. And my argument as a counselor is they inherently know that. You know if you have performed. You know if you have excelled from inside yourself, not from external feedback. But if you get an award, even if you didn't try, and you know you didn't try, then everybody gets a good grade.
Right.
Everybody in class gets an A.
But, those things came out of research that was perverted, much like, people say, oh, drink red wine because that's good for your heart. There's nothing about alcohol that's good for your heart. There are tannins in grape juice that are good for your heart, but you get the same beneficial health effects whether you drink grape juice, eat grapes, or drink wine. So it isn't the alcohol, but people report that because that's cool and that sells, right?
Well,
so,
it's mood altering.
Yeah, but I mean, people said, oh, if you drink red wine, that's good. But, people thought that was cool. But you can drink the grape juice. You don't need the alcohol to get the health benefits.
It doesn't need to be fermented.
It was, it was perverted reporting of the results. And the same thing happened with this whole self-esteem movement. Psychology has done a great deal of research on what builds self-esteem. And what we know is the best way to destroy the self-esteem of an individual is to reward them when they themselves believe that they do not deserve it. That actually destroys self-esteem. So giving people a participation trophy, but keeping score actually destroys the self-esteem of the children.
It devalues them
and
their accomplishments.
And they know that.
Yeah.
And so that movement didn't start from good psychology. That started...
It didn't start from good parenting either.
Well, I want to believe that it started from well-meaning parenting, but it wasn't good psychology. And so if we follow the psychology, what the psychology says is either don't keep score and just let everybody play, which that's my own personal favorite, or keep score and don't give participation trophies. But don't do both. Don't try and hedge your bets by giving everybody a trophy.
Yeah.
That actually is causing more of a problem than it's actually solving.
So I remember in grade school, a couple of years, 6 years of grade school, a couple of different years, I had teachers that would continually realign the seating chart based on grades at the end of a quarter.
Oh my gosh.
And the person that had the very best grade on the test sat in the first seat in the first row next to the door. And the person that had the second best grade sat behind him, and the third best grade sat behind him. And you could walk in the room and see where the less successful students were. But, I see your facial expression, I hear your groan of dismay. I lived in that environment, and it stimulated me to excel. I wanted to move up, and was able to do that, and became friendly competitive with other members of the class about, I'm going to sit in front of you after the next test.
But I would argue that was idiosyncratic. So that was the reaction that you had, but that there were kids who
gave up, who said,
Yeah,
I can't win. I can
exactly.
never get above the middle point. I get that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't universally a bad experience.
No. And, Rudolf Dreikers probably would have been all for that. And so I'm not saying that makes this individual a bad teacher or a horrible person. I don't know that I would recommend it as a process or a procedure to be done nationally.
It has fallen out of favor
Yeah.
in educational circles. People aren't supposed to do that anymore.
Right. Now, if you did that, okay, so let's say you set up that structure where the best student sits in the first seat next to the door. So the worst student is going to be sitting in the last seat over by the windows, okay? So if you did that, and now the best student is study buddies with the worst student, and you go all the way to the middle, then I would argue actually that I wouldn't have a problem with.
Well,
But we don't follow through with that. We tier everybody. We create the hierarchy, but we don't create the solution, or at least a lot of times we don't. Now, maybe in your class you did, and if you did, I would argue actually I love that idea.
in educational research today, there's a lot of literature about pairing more successful with less successful students.
That's all based on Lev Vygotsky and
having
scaffolding. Yeah,
fifth grade student come down and tutor the second grade
absolutely.
student. But
And if we do that in theory but not in practice, then we're just giving lip service. But if we actually build communities of schools where that actually happens, I love that idea.
When I was in high school, I went to a tracked high school. And we had an A track, a B track, and a C track.
And did you like that?
I did, because it operated as an incentive to get myself into the A track.
You didn't start there?
No.
Okay.
No,
okay.
because I had behavioral issues
Yeah.
that interfered with the teacher's perception of my performance. But when I was taking more objective tests and was able to improve my performance score, I also learned to improve my behavior score. And I was the very last senior in my graduating high school class to get certified as a member of the National Honor Society. And they still admitted seniors at the midpoint of the senior year in the National Honor Society, but you had to get a certain grade point average. I didn't trigger that point until middle of my senior year, because I had spent so many years keeping it low. And then when I finally realized what was going on and decided I cared, then it took a while to overcome the momentum or the weight of my years of non-performance. But anyway, we were tracked by the school, and so so then that became in disfavor, disrepute. But they managed to get around it by saying, okay, so we have college prep courses that you have to test to get into. And if you choose to try and you're successful, you can be in this class. We don't assign you there. We're not putting you there. We don't make you go to that. But you can put yourself there. And what I learned was I could get myself into the class with the smart kids.
Yeah.
I actually had to do less work, because teachers learn for the kids that are less academically adept, you have to have a lesson plan that fills the hour and keeps most of the kids in your 40-kid classroom preoccupied and occupied for 45 of the 50-minute hour. And so you give busy work. Copy these 10 sentences, color this map, do these things physically to keep you occupied and focused, so that you cut down on behavioral problems.
Right.
Because the American high school system is, in essence, a body storage facility where we keep kids off the street and out of trouble under adult supervision. If they incidentally acquire an education, well, that's great.
Right.
And we're not opposed to that.
Yeah.
But that's not the main function
And
of
we
it.
could go into how high schools even started at the beginning of the 1900s and talk about how that happened during the Industrial Revolution. But I would still argue, though, that your experience was idiosyncratic, and you got that.
But I think it always is.
But it always is to the individual, absolutely. Yeah. But there were a lot of people who got that message, and it was a real deprecating message, and one that kept them down, and one that created a sense inside of them that they were never going to be able to achieve at a higher level.
So you think that's one of the foundation causes for the anti-intellectualism movement extant in the United States today? I mean, if you get on Facebook, there's never a day that I don't see somebody post, just because you have an education degree doesn't mean you're smart.
Yeah.
Just because you got a college degree doesn't mean you know anything. I mean, they're so opposed to many people are. Not everybody, not most people, but it's out there.
And no, I don't think tracking in high school is what has caused that. I mean, I think that is a function of, I'm not going to wear a mask, I'm not going to get a vaccine, I'm not going to, I'm going to pull a gun out if, in the school drop-off line if I want to. I think that is just the catering to the whim of everybody's ideals, right? Everybody has the right to have their own ideals, which I agree with 100%. But you don't have the right to force that reality on everybody else. The truth is that in every single study that's ever been done, the only thing that has ever positively equated with higher wages is education. And that's been true every year that has been tracked up until 2 years ago. And so again, the pandemic has caused a lot of topsy-turvy stuff to happen in society that's been pretty wonky, and I don't think we're going to see the result of that for probably about 5 years or maybe even a decade. But what I am afraid of is that, yes, that is a message that people are starting to believe in. We don't need no damn education, and we're going to go out and live our lives the way we want to. And actually, we actually are against people who have educations. And where's that going to lead us to?
I think we have to redefine education, because I think
well,
we
that's
have
absolutely
formal education,
right. Sure.
School setting, but somebody gets educated to drive a Caterpillar. Somebody gets educated to do plumbing. Somebody gets educated to paint a house properly. Those are educations.
Absolutely.
And if you learn skills for performance activities, can I build a house? Can I build a wall? Can I plumb a line? Can I lay a tile floor or build a brick wall? Those are educated skills. But it's just a different kind of education.
Well, but I wouldn't divide those things. I would accept those things as educated skills.
Yeah.
And so when I hear people say you don't need no education, right? I hear them say you don't need any of that.
So my son is a software engineer, and I was talking to him the other day about getting an advanced degree. And he's laughing at me, and he said, "Dad, you're too far removed from it." He was telling me that I can get these credentials or certificates that make me promotable in my industry, make me hireable. Other recruiters will contact me and say, "Hey, I'm aware that you have this on your portfolio. Would you consider coming to work for us?" He said, "I don't need a 4-year degree. I don't need a degree outcome if I can just go." And he said, frankly, somebody that hadn't gone to college can now go online, like LinkedIn,
right, offers
free courses to take to give you certification as a Microsoft engineer and get you hireable in a technological field.
Right. And I think that the way in which we conceptualize education probably needs to change. I know that, at the university that I teach at, Washington University in St. Louis, which recently was voted 14th best university in the world, but there is a big component there of promoting online classes because the students are begging for it. But I work in the School of Psychology, and the School of Psychology, because it's run by a lot of old guys that have a paradigm of you got to go to school and you got to be in class, they're not open to that. So there's this movement even within the education system itself. And I believe that there's going to be a reckoning. People need to recognize you can get this education on the internet, and it is just as valid. We need some way of being able to credential that, I think. But I believe that paradigm is changing, but that is still a form of education. So if we're saying you don't need a formal degree, I think that's different than you don't need an education.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I don't think people are making that distinction, but hopefully that's going to become more of a distinction that people are going to be aware of, and we're going to try and find ways of being able to normalize that.
Well,
you know what it says on if you go to Harvard and you get a degree online, do you know what your diploma says? Harvard University.
Yeah.
So Harvard University doesn't care.
Yeah, well, if you were the lowest performing student in med school, when
exactly,
you graduate, they still call you doctor.
Exactly.
Yeah. To my way of thinking, the whole credentialing issue is a non-starter.
Yeah.
I think most of those credentials, licensures,
sure,
are operate in service of the restraint of trade, to control the market and access the market. They're just like the guilds that developed in the Middle Ages. If you didn't belong to the guild, you couldn't do the work. If you couldn't do the work, you couldn't earn a living.
Right.
So you had to be in the guild. It was a political thing. So having a license as a psychologist or a counselor or doctor, you have to jump through the right hoops. But that means they limit. They have more students in med school than will ever be doctors, because some of those won't be able to get residencies because the systems that run them don't create the residencies.
Right.
So you can graduate from med school, but you can't become a doctor without doing the residency. So the critical access point is, can you find a residency?
Yeah. And we went kind of long with this, but I thought that was a great talk. So as always, if you want to get a hold of us, you can get us on psychwithmike.com, suggest shows, or give us some feedback. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. We always want people to go onto the YouTubes and find us, search Psych with Mike there, and subscribe to the show. That is always super beneficial. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.